that in your January 29th intelligence assessment by Sergeant Kites, he has individuals or groups that would potentially pose a threat to the convoy. It's on page 6 of the threat assessment. He lists ISIS. He lists the Islamic State and, you know, international threats. And yet there's no reference of the groups associated with Coots within your own intelligence assessments that were targeting police. I find that incredulous. Could you comment how you would have not had that information included in your threat assessments when on the very next paragraph, sir, you had the threat level at medium within italics, that it had the intent and capability to commit an act of terrorism in Canada?
How many weapons have been seized? What were your threat assessments? These are your intelligence documents. Where is the disconnect? Matthew Green fast-tracks his questions, and there are quite a few revelations. He is really diligent in this question period. Here's the clip.
I just want to begin with testimony from the former Chief Slawley, who stated that based on his intelligence, that in the early stages of the procession towards the convoy and the ultimate occupation, that they had estimated that it would only be for a couple of days. It'd be about a weekend. Was that assessment based on information that you would have provided to him, given your responsibilities as gathering intelligence?
So that was information that was widely known through our entire executive and assessments that had been made by our intelligence groups to go through the intelligence report that existed. And it was our assessment that it was predominantly going to be a shorter period of time, predominantly a weekend.
And ultimately, sir, the assessments you would have signed off on, the final assessments as the person in the senior executive responsible for intelligence, is that correct? Yes or no?
So I didn't sign off on any assessments. The information, and to great credit to the Ontario Provincial Police, they did the predominant...
That suffices, sir. I'm going to move on to the next question. On January 29th, the OPS intelligence assessment published by the Commission, on the January 29th intelligence assessment prepared by Chris Kites, Sergeant Chris Kites, there is pretty significant editorialization, in fact, plagiarization by Rex Murphy. I want to give you the opportunity to respond to this. It's quite stark, and I want you to answer, if in your opinion, to what extent the intelligence assessment relied upon in the decisions to allow trucks onto Wellington Street, along with whether or not you felt you actually had the real expertise and resources to accurately and professionally assess the public safety risk.
So the intelligence assessment that you're referring to was actually first authored on or issued on the 28th. What I can tell you is that was an overall threat assessment that was an overarching document. Beyond that, there was continual information sharing, intelligence sharing between
on that particular document,
and
sir,
our planning team.
On that particular document, sir, respectfully, the last paragraph of page 4 reads like a convoy manifesto. It talks about the struggling of the middle class. It talks about people rising up who otherwise, wouldn't be protesting, and seems to be almost a stark warning about things to come. And my question through you, given the sensitive nature of intelligence, would you not agree that you would have to have unbiased information that is based on actual fact and not the editorialization of people like Rex Murphy in order to make adequate threat assessments? Would you not agree with that basic statement?
So that was one of the pieces that helped contribute to the ultimate threat assessment that went into the operational plan. It wasn't the only and single document that was leveraged.
Okay, so moving on within that assessment, it made reference that persons of interest in some cases had access to firearms. I'm referring to page 9 now. And some persons of interest have made comments on open source that they intend to bring firearms, etc. In at least 2 cases, persons of interest outside of Ottawa and often outside of Ontario, had been met with police who seized firearms in the interest of public safety, where comments about firearms had been made on open source media. So could you verify and extend that you had intelligence that there had in fact been the confiscation of firearms for the intended purpose of continuing on through the convoy to the occupation?
So I can't confirm that because that would have been done as an intelligence update that would feed into this document.
Can you confirm that it was in your report and you would have read that as a threat assessment?
Well, that was absolutely the threat of firearms and the threat of violence was.
Can you
absolutely
confirm,
a
sir,
piece.
that you had intelligence that people had been stopped along the way and their weapons seized?
As you indicated, it is in the intelligence and threat assessment.
Okay, and my last question, the OPP's Provincial Operations Intelligence Bureau, in their interview summary for Superintendent Pat Morris of the Ontario Provincial Police, identified that the Hendon report dated February 9th, that they had become concerned about instances where information about police action became available to protesters. Recently, organizers actually indicated that they had leaks. At what time did you become aware that leaks were being had between the Ottawa police and convoy organizers?
So what I could tell you is right from the outset of any information that we received during the occupation and beyond, we've initiated investigations. The information that was presented yesterday at the Emergency Act inquiry was net new information to us that we had not yet investigated. And we've already, as of last night, have initiated an internal investigation, and we will be reaching out to Mr. Wilson to get more information so that we can look to follow up on that. We've been really clear through this.
Mr. Bell? Mr. Bell, the time is up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to redirect on some of the initial conversations of threat assessment. Certainly, we had discussed that weapons had been seized from persons of interest. To your knowledge, how many persons of interest and how many weapons had been seized based on the information reported in your threat assessment?
So I don't have that information.
Okay.
I can.
You recall, of course, in the first couple of weeks of February at Coots in particular, police officers were feared to be the target of a armed attack on that particular blockade. Are you aware of that?
I am.
And were you updated, and was that included in your threat assessments?
So the information we were gathering was through joint intelligence gathering with all of our national partners as that went on. I think as the occupation unfolded. I think it's important to remember that Coots occurred and began after Ottawa had been established.
But I also want to reference that in your January 29th intelligence assessment by Sergeant Kites, he has individuals or groups that would potentially pose a threat to the convoy. It's on page 6 of the threat assessment. He lists ISIS. He lists the Islamic State and, international threats. And yet there's no reference of the groups associated with Coots within your own intelligence assessments that were targeting police. I find that incredulous. Could you comment how you would have not had that information included in your threat assessments when on the very next paragraph, sir, you had the threat level at medium within italics, that it had the intent and capability to commit an act of terrorism in Canada? ITAC assesses that a violent act of terrorism could occur. Right there. How do you have the disconnect?
So I don't know that it's a disconnect. As you indicated, the intelligence that you're referencing, the information as a result of the Coots takedown was much later than when this intelligence assessment was authored. It was a week or two after that.
Okay, so in your opinion, do you accept that there was a medium threat?
Well, it's not for me to accept. The threat level that's identified is through an integrated terrorist assessment center, and it's something that's determined by our national security experts and provided to us.
Okay, sir. You indicated on March 7th that you were implementing new actions and measures, including continuing internal investigations related to inappropriate police member conduct. Does that include potential leaked information or sympathies that had been uncovered throughout the operational planning with the convoy?
Yeah, as I indicated.
And how senior would that have gotten in your ranks?
As every investigative lead that we were provided, we followed up on. So I can't comment on the investigations as they unfolded. I can let you know that as there was discipline or hearings to be held around them, we did hold those.
Chief, your time is up.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Bell. Mr. Bell, can you just briefly state who was actively involved in the Project Hendon?
So Project Hendon is primarily known as is run by the Ontario Provincial
Sorry, from the
Police.
OPS, who would have reported to you that would have had access to the Hendon reports?
So the Hendon reports were shared widely within our organization. They were actually put into our intelligence unit, into our planning team, and it was reported up. Information was reported up through our chain of command.
There are reports that have been disseminated through the Public Order Emergency Commission that Deputy Ferguson had not been given access to these reports until a week after the convoy had started. Is that correct, Deputy Ferguson, that you didn't have in the onset access to these reports? And if so, why do you think that is?
That is correct. And traditionally, intelligence has been tightly held in organizations to go to people who that's their designated job.
And so, the interview with Superintendent Pat Morrison for the Provincial Operations Intelligence Bureau talks about a failure in utilizing intelligence in operational preparation, decision-making, and proactive planning. And in fact, goes on to state that it appeared that people didn't understand the gravity, that OPS members participating in the Hendon calls, it wasn't apparent to them that they understood the gravity of the situation by January 21st. However, as time progressed, their grasp and factual questions became more evident. So up until that, is it fair to say that your intelligence analysts that were participating with the Hendon calls perhaps underestimated what was coming their way?
I think we all continued to grow in our knowledge and understanding of what was going to occur.
That wasn't the question, sir. Would you agree with the assessment that there is a failure in intelligence analyst analysis and a significant gap between that analysis and the operational planning leading up to the convoy?
No, I wouldn't agree with that, because I think there's many pieces within the intelligence that are very relevant, not within the intelligence, that's extremely relevant.
So let's talk about the relevance of those pieces within the senior leadership team. There has been testimony here that there had been some friction on the senior management team. Did personal relationships get in the way of proper operational planning in the early days of the occupation? I'm going to put that question to Deputy Ferguson.
Yeah, I could say in the early days it did not.
What about in the later days?
As people got more stressed and the situation was evolving, I think the chief's already mentioned that these were very stressful times. We were not all at our best.
To all the information and support that you needed to have an operational plan, or was the gap between intelligence analysis and operation a continued obstacle for you?
No, as we progressed and realized there were Hendon reports at that stage, of course, though, that our city was full of truckers and we were overwhelmed.
So it was at that point too late?
Your time is up.
To Commissioner Carrick to clear the air on what seems to be a bit of a contradiction. During the March 24th SECU meeting, you shared that the Provincial Operation and Intelligence Bureau had identified the Freedom Convoy as a threat to national security. However, on October 19th, OPP Superintendent Pat Morris told the Commission that his team had never received credible information that the Freedom Convoy constituted a direct threat to national security. Do you agree with the assessment of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security that these statements are contradictory?
No, I do not agree that they're contradictory. And I think I went to a great extent to explain where there could be a perception of contradiction before the Commission. On the February the 7th.
I'm happy. I'll take that as your answer. I'm happy to give you an opportunity just to put on the record here today. In your opinion, did the Freedom Convoy constitute a threat of national security?
I believe the Freedom Convoy did present a threat to national security, and it is very important. This is talking from a strategic intelligence standpoint, not evidentiary as required under the CSIS Act or through terrorist charges under the Criminal Code, but from a strategic intelligence standpoint, which leads to decision-making and action planning, absolutely. I feel it
and would the Integrated Terrorism Assessment Center, would their national threat level at medium, given the definition that intelligence indicates that an individual or group within Canada has the intent and capability to commit an act of terrorism in Canada, and ITAC assesses that a violent act or terrorism could occur. Would that inform your intelligence and decision-making, operationally speaking?
Operationally speaking, that would inform decision-making, and there was consultation between what we call POI, Provincial Operational Intelligence Bureau, INSET, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and CSIS to further analyze what our section reported as a possible threat to national security.
There was, in your Hendon report dated February 9th, 2022, it refers to threats to public safety, officer safety, and potentially to national security. Superintendent Morris noted that at certain times the environment was jovial and congenial. However, when police action occurred, the dynamic changed to be more aggressive. And around that time, the POIB had also become concerned about instances where information about police action became available to protesters. So did you share the concerns of Superintendent Morris, given that information?
Did I share the same concerns?
Correct, that police action information became available to protesters.
Yes, I shared those same concerns.
And there is evidence that you could perhaps, that accidental or intentional leakage of information, and that you wanted to batten down the hatches, in his words. Do you agree that that was a threat that you needed to solve from your intelligence and operational perspectives?
It was certainly a risk that needed to be addressed and mitigated.
And what evidence, given the recent testimony of organizers that they had multiple leaks from every level, what do you have to say in terms of you said accidental or intentional? So what information would have led you to believe that there is an intentional leakage of information to the convoy protesters that would make you want to batten down the hatch?
So I have no evidence to say that there was leakage that took place during this time period. I'm agreeing with the sentiments and the statements that were made in the Hendon report at the time. There was a number of follow-up taskings that were issued out to try to determine whether the threats had actually been realized in terms of specific information.
Were you ever
leaked.
briefed on the potential for there to be perhaps sympathies within the Ottawa Police senior management, as has been reported broadly, that may have been a threat to the intelligence that had been shared? Or should I say more clearly, were you comfortable sharing all the information you had with the members of the Ottawa Police?
I had no concerns with sharing all of the intelligence we had with the Ottawa Police or any of our other policing partners.
Was there ever any information provided to you that some of the members may have been sympathetic to the causes and may have been involved in some of the leakages of information?
So there was ongoing concern that there may be police personnel. There were police personnel that were sympathetic to the causes, and there was a risk of information leaving the confines of police services.
And would that include the OPP as well?
That would include every police
And what are you
service.
doing then to investigate the potential for leaked information throughout the course of the convoy? Is this part of a post-mortem that you're engaged in?
So there's no ongoing investigation at this time. There was no evidence ever identified that there were any leaks coming from within the Ontario Provincial Police. That was followed up by POIB, and there was no evidence to substantiate that.
Thank you. Mr. Green, your time is
How
up.
long in your assessment would it have taken to get all the way through that in order to be operational for the plan that you had prior to the invocation?
Sorry, sir. Can I get some clarification? Halfway through, I'm
You
a
were
little
halfway
lost.
through getting indemnified to get the tow trucks. That seemed to be the kind of final piece after the 3-week occupation. Like I'll put to you, sir, that it seems like your assertion, based on how I'm interpreting it, is that if you just had a little bit more time, you could have got the job done without the Emergency Act. So from a timing perspective, you said you were halfway through. Given your intended schedule on the operational plan, when would the operation have taken place?
The exact same time. The operation did not move forward any sooner because of the Emergencies Act.
So you would have moved forward without a full indemnification?
We would have moved forward with whatever indemnification we would have been able to get through the province, and if that did not satisfy the tow providers, then we would have had to rely on our contingency of using police officers to operate tow trucks.
And what would have been the risk there?
It would have taken us longer to accomplish our mission.
How much longer?
I can't say.
There was, I'm sure you were briefed on reports that the Ottawa Police had a plan to displace people and then days before stopped the plan because of some internal dysfunction. What's the timing of that? Like in your briefs, when were you made aware that they had a plan and they called it off in the last second?
So I'm not sure that I'm familiar with specifically what you're referring to, a plan that was called off.
To
in the
clear
last second.
Wellington Street.
So there had been a plan to take positive action to deploy public order to clear a section. There had been some discussion of that. That was dealt with at an operational level and did not proceed. That was not necessarily something that I was intimately involved in. At one point in time, on or around the 9th of February, and please don't hold me to the date, I'm going by memory, I did have conversation with Chief Slowly over concerns that were brought forward by our team about moving forward with a public order plan that they didn't feel we were ready to move forward on.
So I'll share this with you, that it's my assertion as somebody who was in opposition, who had information that was made publicly available to me through the media, like most of the public had. You've now asserted that at no point in time did the government have access to operational plans. Is it safe to say that, given the fact that this had been an ongoing occupation for 3 weeks, that the government didn't have access to operational planning, that the invocation of the Act would have been based on the information that was made publicly available to them? Is that safe to say?
I don't know that I can say that. I have no idea.
Did you inform the government on any aspects of invoking the Act?
I did not inform the government on any aspects of invoking the Act.
So I guess we'll hear from others if they had, but at the time being, I would, taking your testimony at its face value, would say that, the government didn't have it. It's my assertion, I'll put it on the record, that I still haven't necessarily concluded that all of the legal tools were exhausted. However, there's a very serious practical matter, which is the OPS just failed to act for 3 weeks. That we heard testimony earlier today that they were given discretion on enforcing the law, which led to lawlessness. They took the discretion, which was, in my opinion, a distinction without a difference in terms of their ability to act and their failure to act, or their willingness to act. And so, my question through to you is that, did you have to contemplate scenarios where you just couldn't get cooperation on the ground to get things done, much in the same way that they had to call off their own action in the weeks prior to the invocation?
So I'm not clear on the actual question. I'm sorry.
The question is can you appreciate the public's perception that it wasn't necessarily a legal threshold, but a practical threshold, a failure of policing, sir, that the Ottawa police failed to adequately plan for, execute, and provide operational law and order on the ground that ultimately led to the invocation of the Act, given that the government wasn't privy to your operational plans?
So I think failure of the Ottawa police is very harsh terms.
There was a wrecking ball in front of the PMO's office.
These types of incidents, these types of events take methodical planning. They cannot be resolved overnight. This is one of time.
Can they be prevented, though, sir?
I don't believe that this could have been completely prevented. It could have been displaced and dispersed. There very likely still would have been unlawful assembly. It just would have been in the area where it was contained to. It would have been in other areas of the city.
That's fair. Thank you. Do you have any concerns about the sophistication of the supply chain, as well as the infiltration of the movement by people who are high-ranking in Joint Task Force 2, the Prime Minister's security detail, and other military and former police services?
So in general terms, yes, I did have concern over reports of currently serving and or resigned or retired military and police personnel that were embedded into the convoy.
Is it safe to say that type of knowledge, an intimate knowledge of police operations and tactics, would have provided a scenario where this particular occupation and movement was perhaps sometimes ahead of the game in terms of knowing what to expect next? And I referenced the ways in which they use jerry cans, which they use the baseball stadium as a logistics supply chain. Have you, in your experience, ever seen anything that sophisticated before?
I have never seen anything that appears to be that sophisticated. And just to be clear, there's no evidence of this. But I have a hard time accepting that it is merely a coincidence or circumstance that police got stretched across the two furthest points of the southern part of Ontario, Ottawa and Windsor. I don't think that was by happenchance.
It was strategic to stretch your services and to pull you into a bunch of different directions.
I have no evidence of that.
But I think it's a good, I would put,
strategically.
Yeah, it makes sense. There was, in a police report, in an intelligence assessment prepared by the Ottawa Police a section in there about persons of interest that I drew attention to, because there's been a lot of consternation about the difference between charges for weapons and the presence or potential presence of weapons. And so let's talk a little bit about where, in my opinion, police did well. And that was in the persons of interest that were concerned to have access to firearms, some who made comments in open source that they intend to bring firearms, and in 2 cases, at least persons outside of Ottawa, and it said often outside of Ontario, have been met with police who seized firearms in the interest of public safety. When police services seize firearms in the interest of public safety, briefly, are charges laid?
They can be, but not always.
So even though charges weren't laid, that doesn't negate the fact that in 2 instances, there were people who you deemed to be, or not you, police services deemed to be a credible enough threat that they actually went and seized the weapons. Is that correct?
That would be my interpretation of it. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that specific report.
It's from a joint intelligence group, but it has been submitted.
Yes.
But you'll accept that that testimony is what I'm reading in front of me?
Yes, I will.
Okay, and so understanding that, had they not have been seized, were there scenarios that you were prepared for that there could be armed factions with inside the Ottawa occupation?
Yes.
Thank you.